Welcome to the Good Budget Way, where we share real-life stories about everyday people from all walks of life who spend, save, and give to what's truly important in life. I'm your host, Chien. Thanks for letting us know how you've been enjoying this podcast so far. It's been so much fun to read your comments, and we are excited to see how you've been subscribing to the podcast and rating it. Thank you so much. That really does help other folks find this podcast as well. Welcome to the second to last episode of the Good Budget Way Season 1. Last time, in part 1 of Chi-Ming and Juliette's story, we heard why they decided to move away from a place they loved, how they gave away their savings even when they knew they were trying to buy a new place, and how they sold the place they had been living in, which left us with several questions. 1, where were they going to live? 2, how were they going to pay for it without savings? And 3, how their kids would feel about leaving the friends they loved. So if you haven't heard that episode, definitely go back and listen to it so that today's episode will make a lot more sense. Today, in part 2, we'll get answers to all those questions. We'll also hear how they budgeted with a Y with even more families, and at the end, they'll share how they feel about this decision 2 years later. You figured out who you're going to sell to. You still haven't quite figured out the financial thing about how you're going to buy a new place without savings. You have some equity, but not extra savings for this more expensive market. Mm-hmm. And I mean, specifically, you don't actually know where you're going to live next.
Right.
With all of this, and especially you're talking about the context of San Francisco and Bayview in particular being an expensive or more expensive place to move into, how did you figure out what type of home you would be looking for in the Bayview?
One interesting thing about the Bayview is that the prices were increasing because they started from a lower base.
Okay.
The Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood in particular is a neighborhood that it's probably safe to say that it's one of the under-resourced and places within the city, a place that is has its socioeconomic challenges. So I think that's kind of as backstory to that whole thing. In terms of trying to find a particular place, we were then in conversation with a few other folks about possibly, again, doing something similar.
So you were considering a shared home, a duplex type of arrangement, potentially.
That's right, yeah.
So it sounds like then it's your church community, you weren't necessarily the only ones who were thinking about moving to Bayview.
No, because it had come out of a sense that the church was ready to be rooted long term in this neighborhood and to have, different families also, root themselves in the neighborhood. So there were a few families at that point that were looking to purchase.
I see. Okay, so which families were you talking with about potentially sharing a home together?
One family in particular, the Kim family. Okay. We were initially thinking about that it could be possible to live in another duplex. And we began to look at different places, anything from really, really small, like 900 square feet places that I was trying to figure out how to make that work
900
for
square feet.
Our family.
Oh, for a family of 5.
Right.
And how did that compare to the size of the place you were leaving?
I think our flat was maybe 1,200 square feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And several other duplexes.
Tell us about one of the places that you looked at with the Kims.
One of the places was a 3-unit place that, if we... And so that at that point, we're imagining, okay, so who else wants to buy the 3rd unit? So that was one of the places. Actually, probably a block away from where we ended up moving.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So as you're looking at these different places with the Kims, did you find that you were agreeing or disagreeing about the kinds of things you're looking for? Because essentially you're co-buying again, right, with 4 adults and then all the kids.
Yeah, so that was a case where the more we looked, the more we realized that what the 2 families needed were not going to be an easy match. There were, they had younger children, so we kept looking, but we did wonder, we weren't sure that there was going to be a place that could meet both of our needs.
And did you end up finding a place that met both of your needs?
No, ultimately we decided that probably what we were looking for was different enough that even though we were still committed to actually living really within walking distance
Of each other.
That it probably made sense to not try to pursue a TIC arrangement, a tenancy in common.
Where you would purchase together.
Where we would purchase together.
Yeah, that's interesting because it sounds like, okay, in other stories, right, we have a husband and wife who have a disagreement and then they kind of work it out, or they have ways that, wife makes decisions over a certain part of the budget and husband makes a decision about a different part of the budget, and that's kind of how they work it out. But in your story, it's your family and the Kim family have some sense of difference, right, of what you're actually looking for. So you part ways, but you actually still have enough commonality with each other that you want to live within walking distance of each other. It sounds like you still imagine your lives intersecting with one another.
Yeah, a huge amount of commonality, and we wanted to live close. We have, I think, a shared heart with them for the neighborhood, a love of place that's been nurtured in both of our families that we see, and so we definitely wanted to see that continue. We just also knew that that what we were particularly looking for as families in a house was different.
So you still had a common sense of vision. It just wasn't going to be in this one duplex type of house.
Right. Yep.
So getting back a little bit earlier, so given you were moving to a more expensive neighborhood, it sounded like you're considering a shared home, but maybe sharing alone wasn't going to totally solve the cost issue. So in the meantime, did you stop taking all vacations and stop doing all kind of fun stuff to, trim some dollars out of your budget?
Well, interestingly enough, right after we had divested our savings and retirement, it was summertime, and
you've got three girls.
The three girls were itching to get out of San Francisco.
Okay,
and so we did decide to go on a family vacation. And what at first started with thinking about, we could visit a friend in Oregon, ended up lots of friends in Oregon up through Seattle, asking us if we wanted to stay with them. And so we kind of, house hopped our way up through Oregon to Seattle, staying with various friends, where we were graciously welcomed by Church of the Servant King in Oregon, and in Seattle, an old friend, their family were going to be gone on vacation, and so they said, hey, just stay at our place. And so we did, and it was great. They have a hot tub in their beautiful backyard, and so it was an experience again of receiving a lot of hospitality and generosity from others, that we didn't feel we never felt we didn't feel need.
Yeah.
It was an experience of richness.
Right. It wasn't the sense of we just divested our savings and retirement and we can't
and now we just got to eat bread.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways for us it was an experience, a very concrete experience of what Jesus says when the disciples, the followers of Jesus come to him and say, hey, what about us? We've left everything to follow you. Right. And this is in response to Jesus telling them that you're gonna have to leave everything to follow me. And they say, well, we have left everything to follow you, so what about us? And Jesus' response to them is that nobody has left houses or fields or family members that won't receive the same again, 100-fold in this present time. And that was our experience, basically, that we were receiving 100-fold houses, but it was other people's houses, houses of people that we loved and that loved us and that were hospitable to us.
It sounds like both a sense of receiving generosity as well as enjoying relationships of people who loved you and that you loved, who are sharing what they had with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so you did take vacations but didn't pay through the nose for them. So was not taking vacations going to be enough to deal with the price difference of the homes you were looking at buying?
Yeah, no, that wasn't going to cut it.
Okay, so where was this money going to come from?
We didn't actually know.
Okay.
But partway through this process, Juliette and I were talking, and she said, "Well, there's some folks that have talked about giving us a gift, and to help with housing, and it would be helpful to know, what that amount might be, because it would really make a difference if it were X amount."
Mm-hmm. That she had a number in mind.
And she had a specific number in mind.
Okay.
And so the odd thing was when we next saw these folks, they basically said, well, we'd like to talk to you because we'd like to give you X.
The same number.
The same number that she had in mind. And so I think that was just another amazing experience of generosity, God's generosity to us. And it kind of, going back to the question of, well, you're looking to buy a house moving into a particular neighborhood, out of a sense of God's love for the place and your desire to be in that place and to love it as well. But then you're also giving away all your money. How do those things fit together? And so this was part of the piece of what we did not know the answer to, but which we also realized that we didn't have to figure out.
Yeah, so through God's economy, that gift gave us a significant portion of our down payment that we needed. Now, when we say that we couldn't really afford to live in San Francisco, that's a little bit of a chosen statement because given Chi-Ming's salary, we, according to the banks, qualified for a very large amount of loan, but it just wasn't we were more restricted by our budget choice.
What kind of budget choices do you mean?
I think since we've been married, one of the things that we've been committed to is living off of one person's salary. So that was actually, Juliette could get a different job that pays more, and that would increase our capacity to purchase. But we had decided early on that one of the things we wanted to free up space for was to have time available to do things that might not necessarily be paid work. Also, I think we've definitely tried to make choices to be generous with what we have out of our budget. And I think one of the things that's been part of our conversation is something that Ron Sider calls the graduated tithe. You work out what portion, what basic living expenses might look like. And then as your income increases, your personal expenses don't increase to match, but instead you give more and more away.
Your giving and your tithe can increase.
I see. So sometimes people talk about that as like not falling into lifestyle inflation. Right. Where as your salary increases, then all your lifestyle choices kind of go with it.
Yeah. So that was, I think, something that was part of our consciousness also as we were thinking about, well, how much house, one way to say it is how much house can we afford? Another way to say it is how much out of our budget do we choose to spend on housing?
Okay. Yeah.
So at one point we looked at a place originally with the Kims, that one that was a 3-unit place. And we realized that when we did some calculations, even though that place, the Kims couldn't see themselves moving into that place, we thought that could work for our family. And in fact, we do qualify for a purchase of the whole thing.
Like the banks would say, okay.
Right. And then we would still be able to fit within our budget if we rented out the other 2 units.
I see. So then how did you then begin to think about who those other people might be? Because it wasn't going to be the Kims. You'd already kind of decided you were going to look separately from the Kims. Yeah.
So one of the first people we thought of, wouldn't it be great if the Boyd family, they've been thinking about living in San Francisco.
And they did not live in San Francisco at the time?
No, they couldn't afford it.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're both school teachers. And they had been thinking about moving to San Francisco. And this is a different story, but part of it is because Juliette and Jeff and some other folks in our congregation are planning on starting a school.
That's Jeff Boyd.
Jeff Boyd, that's right. Planning on starting a school in the Bayview neighborhood.
I see. So the Boyd family had their motivations also for moving to San Francisco and Bayview, specifically same neighborhood you were looking at.
That's right. Yeah.
So we approached them and we said, hey, well, what if any interest in renting this place with us, living with us? And they jumped on it. Except they wanted even more. They said, we'd love to. In fact, we could do more than rent. We'd love to purchase with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the process probably opened up for us or made us think about is that housing is a huge expense. And
that is for everybody.
For everybody.
Yeah, not just San Francisco, just around the world.
Yeah, and then housing is also one of those things that's a critical component of stability within a community, right? If you can't afford your housing, then that really tears at the fabric of a community with folks needing to move or not being able to afford rents and things like that. So as we thought about the resources that we had been given to steward, one of the things we thought about is, well, how can what we currently have at this present time with this gift and with even
the cash gift that
had been given to us, as well as the borrowing capacity that the banks would loan to us, how can that be used to allow for another family to have stability in their housing?
So it's a sense of very concrete generosity that looks at homes as a place that people need to be in order to stay and be part of the larger community and not kind of being pulled this way and that by different housing prices, whether it's rental prices or sale prices. Yeah.
And at this point, it's probably clear that generosity is begotten out of generosity that we've experienced, right?
Yeah. So the Boyds were excited. They wanted to not just rent from you, but to buy with you. So tell us about some of the houses that you looked at with the Boyds.
Well, there was this one house that looked like a castle. It was
like literally a castle?
Yeah. It was.
It had turrets.
It had turrets.
Oh my goodness!
It had turrets in a big backyard, and this was at the point where our oldest daughter was still in the "I want to live in the garage" phase.
Oh, right. She was the one that said, "I'm not moving. I'm going to stay in the garage."
Right. So I think that house was probably one of the tipping, began kind of a tipping point for her, right? Because she was she's really into this one series where it's about being a ranger, which is
a book series.
A book series.
Ranger's Apprentice.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do rangers do?
Well, apparently they are archers. I don't actually know. Archer, tracker, but archery was a key part of that. And
and they live in castles?
Well, no, they don't actually live in castles, but the turrets were convenient.
Oh, I see. Okay, I think I'm starting to put it together.
Right. Yeah. So as we were at this open house, our daughter was imagining her and then one of the Boyd sons up in the turrets and shooting arrows in the backyard. It's like
at their other siblings.
That's right. Well,
we would prevent that.
Right. Okay.
But that started to make the whole idea of moving more palatable.
I see. Which answers one of the earlier questions, right? About you were going to move not with the Fongs, and the kids were sad about that.
Right.
So there's kind of this newfound joy in the possibility of living with the Boyd family.
Yes, they were very excited about the Boyd family. That might have been the only thing to console them from the loss of the Fong family.
So did you buy the castle house?
No. We got outbid by, I think the winning bid was 30% over list.
Oh, okay. So did you end up buying a place with the Boyds, though?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
It was a large. It's basically a large house.
It's not a duplex?
It's not a duplex.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a large house, and it wasn't exactly what we were looking for to begin with. We were looking for more of a duplex situation
Where there's more separation, separate front doors, separate kitchen, separate everything.
That's right. Yeah.
Separate tiffs with your siblings and parents.
Right. Yeah. Living in one house definitely is much more shared life overlap, and so. But we were glad to be able to find a place.
And how long have you been living there with the Boyd family?
It'll be 2 years in a couple of months.
Oh, wow. So how are you feeling about it now after a couple years of being together?
It's great. It's wonderful. Really we enjoy, the Boyds are super musical. So one of their daughters, Annie, plays guitar. She'll sit in the living room, play guitar, and you'll hear beautiful harmonies kind of waft up the stairs. It's wonderful.
Nice. So you get live music at home.
Yes, we get nightly concerts. And also, I think they help us to be in that neighborhood. Jeff and John Mark in particular, although all of them, they have a way of easily meeting new people and finding common ground. And so whereas I might be more shy and reserved, they definitely help me to know our neighbors, to feel at ease in our neighborhood.
So yeah, I think that's really beautiful because it gives this color of not just that you help each other be in the neighborhood because of the financial arrangement, but there's a sense of the different kinds of people that you are enables you to build relationships in the neighborhood. And earlier you were talking about the fabric of a community, to become part of the fabric of the community together.
Yes.
That's really beautiful.
Like John Mark plays basketball at the local mini park, right? So he's constantly bringing his friends, different folks that come over and have dinner, hang out. And so I think there's, like Juliette said, there's an ease with which they in particular meet folks that we probably don't have a similar kind of ease. But once those relationships are started, then we have the ability to also share in those relationships and really get to know folks.
And it sounds like a lot of this also has to kind of do with the sense of common vision, right? Of what does it mean to not just choose a particular neighborhood, but build relationships and go deep with folks. That it sounds like really comes out of your church community together with all the families that you've mentioned.
Right.
The Boyds, the Kims, the Lus, the Fongs, you.
Yes.
And that's just 5 families out of this church, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Well, so I just named 5 different families, right? And you had like some different kinds of financial transactions and relationships with these 5 families that are fairly close with a lot of them. So would you recommend these kinds of financial ties and arrangements to just, folks, all of our listeners, like go out and find someone to buy a house with?
I think that, our financial choices, they really are a reflection and a result of a lot of other little choices to be a community and to share life together. So
you're not recommending going on Craigslist to find any family to share a house with and purchase together.
Right. But if in all the ways that we can continue to build, a common understanding and even just common life, moms being at the park together with their kids and carpooling to different places or going grocery shopping together. I think those are all the ways in which that community life and that trust and that partnership is built up, and lots of and I think our church in particular happens to be strong in studying the Word together and therefore being in conversation and being shaped together in common vision.
I see. So you're having Bible studies together with all these families, and that's shaping everyone's sense of the kind of lives they want to live separately as well as together.
I think that the life that we've experienced with this kind of sharing and this kind of being tied to other families is really a very, very rich and abundant life. So it might not necessarily be rich in a material sense of having, I don't know, like the typical, a lot of space to yourself.
You're not living in a mansion with a huge backyard and
right.
Yeah.
But the richness of the relationship and the simple joys of the thickness of relationship with other folks it really is a really rich life. So while it's not something that you just kind of go wake up one day and say, okay, well, I'm going to find somebody, and we're going to buy a house together. And it is, I think, something that is good and can be developed over time with work and with patience. I think that is the kind of fruitful life that God would have us live, and that we can testify to it being a really, really good life.
With this common sense of vision and purpose, and these relationships in your story have been built over decades, right? And to a point where you actually can have these kinds of conversations about, would we maybe buy a house together, or would I sell my house to you, and think about what you need and that process. That's really beautiful. So thank you both so much for coming and sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
What an incredible story. I am so glad that Chi-Ming and Juliette came in to tell us their story, which really is a story of 5 different families in their church that have such deep relationships. At the Good Budget Way, we talk with people you trust, and in this story, so many times we hear them talking with folks about really big financial decisions, like buying and selling homes, and they're making choices for the sake of each other and not just for themselves. I was struck by how clearly Chi-Ming and Juliette budget with a Y. They spend on what's truly important, putting relationships ahead of other things they might want. But it's not just them. What's so beautiful to see is this web of relationships of 5 families who all budget with a Y. Through their money choices and money conversations, they're all prioritizing each other and this neighborhood, Bayview, where their church desires deeper, longer-running relationships in the broader community. For myself, that really inspires me to go deeper in the relationships that I have with the people I trust. Because in their story, I really hear a sense of joy, and I would love to have more of that joy. Even though I'm probably not going to do exactly what they did, because let's face it, theirs is a rare story. I really appreciated what Juliette said. It starts at the playground. It starts by going grocery shopping together and extending generosity by having folks over for dinner. And those are things I can really imagine doing to go deeper in relationship with people I love. Wow, I cannot believe The Good Budget Way Season 1 is almost over. We have one final episode left, and in that one, we're going to do something a little different. We'll get to hear from you, our listeners, your comments and your questions about all the stories that we've heard this season, and you'll get to hear from us too. So if you want to be part of the final episode of this season, go to goodbudget.com/podcast and record your comments in your own voice. It's just like leaving a voicemail. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Good Budget Way. If you're enjoying this podcast, subscribe for more and rate it to help other people find it too. And let us know what you thought of Chi-Ming and Juliette's story on our website at goodbudget.com/podcast. And if they inspired you to budget with a Y, head on over to goodbudget.com to get started on your budget with our easy-to-use tools. Or look for the Good Budget app on Google Play or the App Store. Happy budgeting!